Bulletproof. That was the unvetted promise when Tesla's founder, acting as chief product officer with zero oversight, unveiled this truck in 2019, claiming it could stop a 9mm bullet. Then the armor glass shattered on stage. That public embarrassment foreshadowed the real engineering failures, like rusted body panels and exterior parts falling off on the highway. Yet over 1 million consumers still paid deposits. As we will see, almost all of them would regret backing this unchecked CPO fantasy. None of these failures were accidents. They were structural warning signs. The biggest product design warnings the auto industry has seen in decades. But behind the memes, a dangerous trend emerged. When a founder acts as CPO without constraints, they promise products unlike anything the market has ever seen. The entry model was priced at $39,900, a figure that made the crowd gasp. The dual motor, $49,900. The tri-motor, $69,900. For context, a loaded Ford F-150 cost more. Unchecked by a board, Tesla's leader was declaring war on the entire pickup industry. Top-down specifications demanded a 500-mile range, a 14,000-pound towing capacity, and a 3,500-pound payload. 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. The founder boasted it would beat an F-150 and outrun a Porsche 911. He claimed it could race the Baja and even float like a boat. Unchecked by a marketing department, his wild promises spread within days. Tesla claimed 200,000 initial deposits of $100. As that figure ballooned past 1 million, it justified the founder's worst impulses. It captured the imagination of buyers wanting a sci-fi fantasy, ignoring the lack of practical utility that an experienced product team would require. But there was a massive risk indicator that leadership ignored. Those $100 deposits were entirely refundable. They were cheap options, not verified demand. A tiny financial barrier to buy into the founder's futuristic marketing campaign. The entry barrier was lower than dinner for two, and an unchecked leader knew exactly how to exploit that metric. That unverified metric became the core of investor decks and executive boasts, treated as absolute proof of market viability. In reality, it only proved that 1 million people had a spare $100 and a dream of driving a sci-fi prop. Tesla held a golden window in 2019, with 0 electric competitors. Rivian was still years away from actual delivery. Ford's Lightning was only a concept. Good governance could have secured this entire massive product category for Tesla. All they had to do was execute, but the CPO's imaginary timeline went completely unchallenged. Production was promised for 2021. The $39,900 entry model was slated for the following year. Those deadlines passed in silence. With no oversight system, there was no accountability, just quiet delays masked by louder executive hype. Meanwhile, actual auto product managers at Ford, Rivian, and GM shipped their electric trucks and stole the lead. Tesla's lead evaporated while engineering tried to bend uncooperative metal. Let's unpack what was actually happening behind closed doors. The founder's sci-fi design choice created massive manufacturing nightmares. His chosen steel was too stiff to be stamped by normal automotive presses. The metal broke the presses, requiring costly pre-scoring before any bending could happen. Because curves were impossible, every panel had to be flat. The brutalist style was not a genius design stroke. It was a physical limitation of his chosen metal. Blocked by the materials marketing spun these flat lines as futuristic. It was a clever cover-up for major leadership errors. It is a narrative that highlights a core warning sign. When a single leader's ego-driven design dictates materials rather than customer needs, failure is inevitable. You have doomed the product before manufacturing begins. Unchecked by a proper validation system, leadership promised a revolutionary vehicle they could not scale. This vanity metal also made the truck nearly impossible to manufacture. Experienced automotive product developers outside of Tesla's closed executive bubble saw this massive engineering failure coming from miles away. Industry history had already warned against stainless steel, with the infamous DeLorean acting as a prime warning. No other manufacturer repeated the mistake. It is costly heavy and structurally impractical. It resists standard tooling and corrodes easily. Decades ago, disciplined industry oversight settled on painted steel and aluminum for clear structural reasons. But an unchecked leader did not care about industry knowledge. He prioritized futuristic aesthetics over fundamental vehicle engineering. He got his sci-fi looks, but the engineering compromises were only just beginning. Once the final product shipped, those compromises exposed the deep flaws in Tesla's product management structure. Arriving 4 years late in late 2023, the actual product was a stark wake-up call for the industry. Ironically, a literal sledgehammer was the only part of the original demo that held up. That cheap base model scrapped due to uncontrolled development and material costs. Instead, buyers faced a baseline $60,990 price, and delivery was delayed. Let's look at the true cost of zero oversight. Under the founder, the all-wheel option was $80,000, or his $99,000 flagship. By mid-2024, unchecked product decisions killed the cheapest option, hiking the base price to $99,000. This classic founder overpromise fell flat. Instead of a cheap work truck, they built a luxury toy with failing specs. Take the 500-mile range. Without realistic testing, it maxed at 340 miles. A costly bolt-on backup battery promised 470 miles, but the original 500-mile claim was pure executive fiction. The promised towing fell to 11,000 pounds, and payload plummeted too. Cut to 2,500. Every unchecked claim from the 2019 launch was quietly walked back. Let's look at what hurts most. Every rival like the Lightning actually delivered on their specs. Rivian and Chevy kept their word. Professional product teams didn't promise one thing and ship another. Other brands avoided fantasy pricing. But Tesla lacked those corporate guardrails. Then the lack of quality oversight struck. Weeks after delivery, owners posted photos of orange rust spots, blemishing their supposedly rust-proof steel bodies. Sometimes after just 2 days of rain. This hyped apocalypse vehicle was rusting faster than a '92 Civic. The corporate manual itself soon exposed the awkward reality of the design. The unpainted steel panels were vulnerable to grease, oil bird droppings, tree sap, and dead bugs, even road salt. Owners had to scrub off debris instantly. One driver put a magnet on his vehicle for a month and found severe corrosion underneath. On user forums, a popular thread titled "Rust Spots / Corrosion is the Norm" became the most viewed topic. A frustrated user offered a piece of advice summarizing this poor product engineering: do not drive it in the rain or get it wet, for a utility vehicle costing more than a yearly salary. But the rust was just the starting failure. Massive recalls began stacking up, exposing a lack of validation. First, the accelerator pedal got stuck wide open, causing sudden acceleration. Then the single, giant windshield wiper motor burned out from poor electrical design. Backup cameras failed to activate. Exterior trim pieces flew off at speed because of weak quality control, endangering other drivers on the road. Then, crucial drive inverters failed without warning, suddenly cutting all wheel power mid-drive. By the end of 2024, it faced 7 major recalls. By late 2025, that number hit 10. This proved to be a historic failure of product release. In March 2025, Tesla had to recall 46,000 trucks because of a critical steel panel, secured only by glue, would literally fly off at highway speed. No loose screws, no software glitch. The actual physical body of the vehicle could fly off on the highway behind you. The vehicle the founder boasted was bulletproof was falling apart on the freeway. This is what happens without real product leadership. This vehicle was aggressively marketed with a sledgehammer stunt, and the CEO bragged it could survive a war zone. Yet the panels were glued so poorly that normal driving shook them loose. It was an engineering joke. There is a word for this massive gap: hubris. When I saw my first Cybertruck last year, the flaws were obvious. It was massive, a pure novelty. Kids stood nearby taking photos as if they were looking at a spaceship. Their father dragged them away, a perfect metaphor for a product designed for attention rather than practical utility. Everyone wants to stare, but nobody wants to buy. Stick with me as we unpack the financial fallout of this mistake. Hit subscribe to follow these business breakdowns. Now let us look at the corporate damage which goes far beyond a single truck. In 2024, they sold 39,000 units, a massive miss compared to the founders' unrealistic promises. But early adopters still offered some goodwill, masking the core structural product failures for a brief moment. A backlog of eager fans paid premium prices for early models, allowing blind optimists to ignore product issues and promise a massive ramp. Then 2025 hit. Sales collapsed. First quarter fell to 6,000, second to 4,000. By the third quarter, only 5,000. The unchecked project sank, delivering just 20,000 vehicles all year. A 48% crash, marking the worst sales drop of any electric car in America that year. We must remember this was supposed to be the product's peak, not its ultimate rock bottom. This is the cost of founder overreach. A target of 250,000 units, but idle factories built for half that, targeting 250,000 Cybertrucks annually at Gigafactory, Texas. Without proper oversight, the plant ran at under 10% capacity. Even the Ford F-150 Lightning, a struggling model Ford was actively phasing out, was comfortably outselling the founder's pet project. As the demand crisis deepened, the unchecked executive team resorted to a desperate, unprecedented move in late 2025. Reports emerged that SpaceX bought over 1,000 trucks, a corporate fleet potentially reaching 2,000 units, at $80,000 apiece. That meant $80 million to $160 million in internal sales. Deliveries were also seen arriving at XAI offices. The founder was essentially buying his own vehicles to make the division's metrics look less disastrous. This desperate maneuver highlights a total lack of board oversight, and yet, even with this artificial help, annual sales struggled to reach 20,000 units. The original target was 250,000, not a tiny fraction, propped up by sister companies. We see a massive contradiction here. The founder repeatedly insisted to shareholders that his company was no longer just an automaker. He claimed it was an artificial intelligence firm, even advising traditional automotive investors to sell their stock and walk away. Why then redirect over $100 million of SpaceX funds to prop up a consumer vehicle that allegedly does not define the future? The answer is classic unchecked ego. This vehicle was his personal baby. Other models could quietly fade, but this high-profile failure is a direct blow to his brand. Meanwhile, the secondary market collapsed into absolute freefall. Early buyers who paid six figures quickly realized they were stuck with the vehicles. To make matters worse, for over 12 months post-launch, the company legally blocked owners from reselling with threats of litigation. When management finally dropped this restriction in 2025, we saw why. They were hiding the devastating market data. For instance, one early unit that originally auctioned for $146,500 in 2024 fetched a mere $70,000 18 months later, barely driven. Owners faced massive trade-in losses of up to 38% after just 1 year. A typical utility truck loses 24% of its value over 3 years. This model suffered worse depreciation in just 12 months. Several corporate showrooms reportedly refused trade-ins, entirely terrified they would be stuck with rapidly depreciating inventory they could not sell. Think about the message that sends. The company's own retail network refused to stock their flagship product. The secondary market quickly flooded with low-mileage vehicles from buyers who waited years, drove them briefly, and immediately regretted the purchase. The founder's rigid 1-year resale ban prevented these customers from cutting their financial losses in a timely manner. They were forced to endure that buyer's remorse for a full year before realizing their massive losses. When independent automotive analysts ran the data, they projected a devastating 60% drop over 5 years, compared to 39% for standard utility trucks. It was not just losing value, it was hemorrhaging cash faster than any light truck in modern automotive history. But let's look closer at what most commentators miss: the core issue that transforms this from a bad launch into a textbook governance disaster. This project did not fail simply because of bad engineering. Mediocre trucks sell well all the time when backed by utility and brand trust. It failed because it was the unchecked dream of a founder CPO completely detached from market realities. Every wild promise, every delayed deadline, every safety recall, and every manipulated metric pointed to a systemic product management failure. The vehicle was developed and launched through absolute founder hubris. Make an absurd promise, whip up massive public excitement, and scramble to fix the inevitable engineering disaster later. That chaotic strategy once made the enterprise highly valuable and even launched rockets. But a $100,000 consumer vehicle that fails in wet weather, that is where unchecked product design hits a hard wall. This was the founder's pet project, reportedly sketched on a napkin. Because there was no product committee to restrain him, the vehicle became a direct reflection of his personality. Buyers did not just see an automotive utility vehicle. They saw a loud statement about the founder's personal brand and politics. Unfortunately, by 2025, that public image had deeply alienated millions of potential buyers. Market research reveals the crisis. Traditional electric vehicle buyers, who are typically younger and eco-conscious, heavily overlapped with a demographic deeply repulsed by his highly political government activities. This specific truck, born from a lack of corporate filter, was tied directly to his personal identity. Consequently, operating the vehicle became a polarizing political statement regardless of the driver's intent. Drivers suffered vandalism, prompting some to wrap their vehicles in neutral colors or completely strip away all brand logos, desperate to hide the association. The brand's most hyped innovation became the one product customers desperately wanted to camouflage. Other electric models survived the backlash because of their utility. Consumers still needed practical mainstream crossovers and sedans, but no one actually needs a six-figure angular steel monstrosity. It was purely an identity-driven product. Once that identity became politically toxic to half the market, any logical business case vanished. Customers simply will not compromise on a highly controversial luxury item. They walk away. In February 2026, a cheaper dual-motor variant hit $59,990, finally approaching the original pricing. It stood as a painful admission that 6 years of unchecked product planning and pricing strategy had failed. But the real question is whether any price cut can fix the damage. When a founder acts as chief product officer with zero oversight, the problem is never the price, or the rust, or the recalls. It was the gap between unchecked founder promises and engineering reality. Over 1 million people paid deposits. Tesla only sold 60,000. 940,000 rejected his unvetted design and walked. If the most hyped vehicle of our century, driven by an unchecked billionaire founder, can fail this spectacularly, what does that tell us about the gap between founder hype and reality? An unchecked founder couldn't fool 1 million adults for more than a year. Yet Roblox convinced millions of kids to build their entire platform for free, making $40 billion. We have that story right here.